Alchemy begins with death. When I talk with most people about how do you think transformation works, or okay, you want to make this change in your life, where do you think you start? They say something usually to the effect of, oh, I'm going to imagine what I want and think about where I'm wanting to go and visualize and make a vision board. That's not where we start in alchemy. There is a place for that. It's just not the first part. That is some of what we do in one of the stages, but it's not the beginning. It's the middle. Where most people want to start the process of transformation is in the middle of the cycle of alchemy. Alchemy starts with death. This is one of the main deterrents to why people don't enter the cycle of transformation in the first place. So as I mentioned, people are like, gosh, I'm in this job I really don't like, or I'm in this relationship that I know isn't right, or I really hate living in this city, but I'm afraid to lose my job. What if I don't get another job? What if I break up with my person and then nobody ever loves me again? So there's this fear of loss and this aversion to loss.
Hi, Michelle. Your journey as a shamanic practitioner brings to mind the alchemical process of solve and coagulate, the art of dissolving and reuniting elements to transform them into something entirely new. Like an alchemist, you've distilled ancient practices and modern insights, fusing them into a form of spiritual mentorship uniquely your own. Can you introduce yourself by sharing how you see this alchemical process in your own work and evolution as a healer and a teacher? What elements did you dissolve and reintegrate along your path to arrive at your practice today?
Let's piece that out a little bit. My first introduction to spiritual practice was through the shamanic lens. I started studying and practicing when I was 15. I happened my way into my very first shamanic workshop, and the rest snowballed from there. That really is at the core of everything I do. You're drawing this connection between the shamanic worldview and the alchemical worldview, and there certainly is a lot of overlap. Alchemy plays nice with a lot of other modalities, and it is rooted in this animistic worldview in terms of the connection of all things and the connection between the microcosm and the macrocosm of how we see the world, the above and below realms, which is also true in the shamanic worldview. There's the animistic consciousness of all things are alive and all things are connected through that unifying life force, and the above and below realms in the middle world as well. For me, shamanism and alchemy have always gone very nicely together, and that's partly because of this overlap in their cosmologies. In terms of the alchemical nature of how I have been on my journey and then synthesized this into my work, there's both in the shamanic worldview and the alchemical cycle, these three phases: death, purification, and rebirth. And if you like, at some point during the episode, we can break down for your audience a little bit more in depth the 7 stages. I think people really get a lot out of that. But the alchemical cycle is divided into these 3 phases of death, purification, and rebirth. And we also see that within the shamanic lens as well, of that which dies then goes through this process of composting, reformation, and then reanimation. We have the cycle of the seasons, for example. As a teenager, coming into this world, I was in high school at the time. I was feeling different from other people. I know all teenagers feel that way, but I very much felt on the outside. There was this other world that made sense to me that I didn't hear other people talking about, at least among my peers. Then I found my way to this shamanic workshop. It gave me the vocabulary for everything I already felt about the world. And I felt a sense of belonging in that because it was rooted in this animistic consciousness that made sense to me. Particularly through the remainder of my high school years and my time at university, there was a lot of that death, purification, and rebirth happening for me. I was in the biology department at university, earning my degree in biology, specializing in animal behavior. My undergrad research is in hummingbird foraging behavior. So I was simultaneously studying science alongside all my classmates who were very focused on Western medicine and the dogma of science. And here I was also in the scientific community, but also in the spiritual community simultaneously while at university, going through my studies in energy medicine and continuing my shamanic studies as well. I just remember this very interesting inner experience of, okay, here we have these 2 systems of science and spirituality both of which I really love and I strongly believe in. For me, they go very nicely together, just like shamanism and alchemy go very nicely together. And here we have the practicality of the modern world. We have the necessities of keeping a calendar and living in the modern community as we have constructed this societal system. But also, we are children of Earth. We belong to Gaia and we belong to this interconnected web of life. We are this material form and also so much more than this material form. For me, there's always been the yes and consciousness. I really love that alchemy holds both the scientific and the spiritual. We have alchemy to thank for all of our modern sciences. The root of the word alchemy is the same as the root of the word chemistry. We have alchemy to thank all of the ancient alchemists asking questions about what is life? What is the nature of life? What is the nature of reality? What is the nature of consciousness? What is the earth made of? What are our bodies made of? And that led to various alchemical experiments that now we look back at to study the composition of life. We have the periodic table, we have chemistry, we have physics, we have astronomy, we have modern medicine, all thanks to alchemy and people asking very philosophical questions about what is the nature of life and what is the nature of reality. Speaking about the intersection of philosophy and science, particularly when we're asking questions about defining consciousness and intelligence. Modern science still has no concrete definition for what is death, what is life, what is consciousness, what is intelligence. These are all very philosophical questions that the systems of spiritual practice, shamanism, alchemy, etc., that is their zone of genius. And asking those types of questions and then seeking to understand them through these scientific explorations of working with the body, working with materials.
In my research, after reading through some of the material, I came up with a saying that scientists seek to discover what the alchemists already know.
Do the alchemists already know it, or are the alchemists also seeking to discover it just through this different realm of understanding? Because how did the alchemists come to know it? This is one of my favorite parts of the alchemical journey. It's not that you can arrive at this final stage and then have all the answers. We become the version of ourselves who has this understanding by virtue of this death, purification, and rebirth process. In the process of alchemy, the alchemist isn't just working outside of themselves on experiments in the lab. It is the alchemist themselves who is surrendering their own identity and their own consciousness to this process of transmutation and transformation. The alchemist must die, be purified, be reborn in order to come into this knowing.
It's something that has captured the human imagination for centuries, with roots stretching back to ancient civilizations, Egypt, Greece, China. It's often described as a proto-science and a spiritual philosophy. People have historically pursued alchemy to turn base metals into gold, seek immortality, understand the hidden principles of nature. Given this rich history, are there any principles you can share of alchemy that have evolved over time? And what key insights remain relevant to the modern alchemist?
I think the principles themselves, I'm answering this through the modern context and as the person that I am in this iteration of my earth walk. As I understand it, the principles of alchemy have not changed because they are rooted in universal law, and the universal law doesn't change. The sun pretty consistently has come up in the east, gone across the sky, and set in the west. And we have pretty consistently on Earth followed the cycles of we head into winter, just like we are now here in the Northern Hemisphere. The trees are dropping their leaves. They'll go into this period of rest. And then in the spring, new buds emerge, and then the fruiting and flowering and the full leaves of summer. And going into this cycle again of entering into the fall. And that has been true throughout the history of Earth. Because the principles of alchemy, they're not mutable. They're not just subject to the whims or the fashions of humanity. Alchemy is profoundly not human. It's a very primal, ancient, and elemental process. It is applicable to our human understanding, to our lives, societies, health, and relationships because it is based in universal law. And that which is based in universal law is universally applicable. So to your question about how have the principles of alchemy changed, I don't think they have. But I do think that the application of them has certainly changed as we as a society have grown and shifted in the iteration of our consciousness. And it's hard for me to tell people what principles of alchemy are applicable because I teach a 200-hour certification training that spans a year long. Here we are in a brief conversation. I'll do what I can, but this is a very deep study that if you are called to, there are ways to dive into this. Like I said, I have this training course. We're barely dipping the tip of our toe in the water here in this conversation. The principles of alchemy, primarily, it is this process, Peter, as you mentioned, of the transmutation of base material into its most elevated form. In pop culture consciousness, anyone who's read the Harry Potter books, for example, people have this understanding of alchemy as the process of turning lead into gold. While this is not inaccurate, it is a wholly inadequate descriptor of what the process of alchemy is. Moving from the most basic raw form through this process of actualization. The releasing of the old identity is the death part of that process. And this purification, rectification, the reorganization of that material into something that is reborn as the most fully illuminated, actualized, radiant version of itself. The alchemists themselves, rather than just working on these things externally in the lab, but it's really a process of surrendering oneself to that cycle and to those mysteries.
I can see how linked it is to personal transformation. I regard it as the inner alchemy of self-improvement. And I know some believe that as alchemists sought to turn lead into gold, people can transform personal hardships into wisdom and resilience. Can you explain the concept of inner alchemy and how it applies to modern practices of personal development or personal improvement?
Would this be a good time to go into the 7 stages a little
Go
more
for
in
it.
depth? Because then I'll be able to draw practical examples from that. All right, people. So buckle up and feel free to take notes if you would like to. If you don't want to take notes, that's totally fine. I have a free guide to the 7 stages of alchemy that you can download from my website that has the names of those. And the guide will go a little bit more in depth into where people usually get stuck in the cycle of transformation and practices and tools for how to move through that cycle. You can download it from my website, michellehawk.com, hawk like the bird. Get your free guide to the stages of alchemy. We'll go into it here and I'll draw those connections, Peter, like you're asking, to these practical examples. It's very hard to talk about alchemy purely in the hypothetical sense because it is a very grounded practice, a very concrete, logical system. And when we root into that, it gives people a roadmap. This is one of my favorite things about the process of alchemy. It demystifies the process of transformation. So many people look at their lives and maybe they're in a relationship that isn't fulfilling or they know is not the right person. They're in a job they hate. They're in a home that isn't the right place, or they're living in a city that they know isn't right, but they're not really sure where to go. They know that they're not comfortable. Something in their body is, I don't feel really great, but there's nothing really wrong. There's a lot of people living a less than thriving life. They know that I'm really not comfortable or happy with where I'm at, but I just don't really know what to do. And I'd really like something to change, but I don't even know where to start. Or I'm afraid to enter into that in the first place because I'm afraid of what will happen, or I'm afraid I'm going to lose all my friends, or people won't understand, or I don't even know what I want, but I know I just don't want this. So there's fear and resistance and cultural conditioning that deters people from entering into the process of transformation in the first place. Alchemy is the roadmap to that process. This is one of the things I love about it so much, and one of the things that all my students in that course love about alchemy too. They say, Michelle, I feel so much more confident and empowered now in making changes in my life because I understand how transformation works. I can trust the stages of alchemy. So even if I'm uncomfortable now, I know where I'm going and I can lean into that process. For all of you listening, if you're in one of those situations I described, or you're looking around at your life saying, gosh, I know this isn't right, but I'm not really sure what to do, let this inspire you. See if this helps. I'm in this stage of alchemy right now, and my guide helps you to do is identify which stage of alchemy are you in, and then how to apply appropriate practices to help you move to the next stage and continue the process of transformation rather than just being stuck. which is what a lot of people do. Let's get into the stages, and I'll give you some of these tools. The cycle of alchemy is divided into 3 phases: death, purification, and rebirth. Now, those 3 phases are further subdivided into 7 stages. We've got 2 stages in the death phase, 2 stages in the purification phase, and 3 stages in the rebirth phase. Alchemy begins with death. When I talk with most people about how do you think transformation works, or, okay, you want to make this change in your life, where do you think you start? They say something usually to the effect of, oh, I'm going to imagine what I want and think about where I'm wanting to go and visualize and make a vision board. That's not where we start in alchemy. There is a place for that. It's just not the first part.
Those are states rather than stages.
That is some of what we do in one of the stages, but it's not the beginning. It's actually starts in the middle. Where most people want to start the process of transformation is in the middle of the cycle of alchemy. But as I've said a few times now, alchemy starts with death. This is one of the main deterrents to why people don't enter the cycle of transformation in the first place. So as I mentioned, people are like, gosh, I'm in this job I really don't like, or I'm in this relationship that I know isn't right, or I really hate living in this city, but I'm afraid to lose my job. What if I don't get another job? What if I break up with my person and then nobody ever loves me again? So there's this fear of loss and this aversion to loss. But just as we're seeing outside heading into winter, the leaves have to fall off the trees in order for the tree to rest and then go through this cycle of renewal. They have to compost to make this fertile soil for new life to grow. So we begin with death. And the first stage of alchemy is called calcination. Calcination means to take down to the bone. It's this process of stripping away, and it is the loss and death of material physical structures. Calcination type experiences in our lives could be losing your job or quitting your job, because that's the loss of a material structure of your employment or your career. It could be ending a relationship or losing a loved one, a loss of that physical structure of that relationship in your life, whether that person passes away or not. Calcination type activities could also be cleaning out your closet, getting rid of stuff, clothes, jewelry that you don't wear anymore that fits some old version of you. Or you're like, that's not how I like to express myself anymore. I don't wear my punk band t-shirts with the ripped jeans. Now I'm into something else. Calcination, it's the loss, death of physical structures that is necessary to create space for this new version of yourself. The second stage of alchemy is dissolution. It's the loss and death of energetic and emotional structures. There's a lot of grief work that happens here, a lot of dismantling beliefs, deconstructing old identity, deconstructing beliefs about some old version of ourselves. Inner child work happens here. This is where if you lose that job or you quit your job, maybe it's a really good thing because it really wasn't the right job for you, but there's some sort of dismantling of that old version of yourself of who you used to be in that job. Or same if you end a relationship where there's that grieving process. I know that wasn't the right person for me, but I am letting that go. I'm dissolving that version of myself. I'm doing that dismantling of my identity. Often these 2 stages go together. As we're going through the cycle of alchemy, the way that people experience it can be more fluid. You might be in more than one stage at once. You might be experiencing a couple stages simultaneously in the same area or in different areas of your life. Calcination and dissolution often go together. As you are losing the physical structures or saying goodbye to the physical structures in your life, you're also saying goodbye to the energetic and etheric identity structures and the emotional structures that were holding the architecture of your consciousness. Does that make sense so far?
Yep, beautiful. I'm listening to you. I know I'm looking away. I'm making my own notes in response to what you're saying.
Awesome. And for all of you listening, you're welcome to take notes too. So far, so good. We're in the death phase and we're ready to shift into the purification phase. So now we shift into the purification phase and we're in stage 3, which is called separation. This is where people get to do some of what I was talking about earlier of, oh, I want to visualize and I want to imagine and I want to make a vision board and think about what I want next. This is where we're doing a little bit more of that mental process of analysis and perspective and discernment, because you've been through the death phase. So imagine you're like, okay, I quit my job. I broke up with my partner. I'm ready to move to a new city. Now what? In separation, you're like, okay, here I'm sorting. I'm making my pros and cons list. I'm sorting into piles of what I really liked from that job, even though the job wasn't right for me. Here are the few pieces that I really liked that I'd like to continue in my next job. Here are the pieces that I never want to do again. Here are some pieces of something I'd like to try next time. So you're like, what am I keeping? What am I getting rid of? And what are the new things I want to bring in? So there's this sorting into piles piece where people can imagine and visualize and think about who this version of you're being born into and invite in some of those pieces. Now we shift into stage 4. We're still in the purification phase. We haven't gotten to rebirth yet. This 4th stage is called conjunction. Conjunction is the recombination and rectification of those pieces that we separated and sorted out. From separation, you threw out those last few pieces. You're like, okay, I'm done. And so now I'm bringing in what am I keeping and what new stuff am I bringing in? And you're putting that together to create a rudimentary initial form. Here's where people get stuck in this stage. They mistake the rudimentary form for the final version. There's still more to go, people. Don't mistake this for the final version. So here's a real life example. Say you make a book, or if you're an entrepreneur, you put out a beta program, or you come up with some first version of something, or you start dating. You put together your resume, you're maybe temping at a job, or you're doing a trial period at a job, or you start dating somebody. You're not in the final stage yet. So it's the first draft of your book. Do not mistake the first draft of your book for the final version. There's so much more to go. Do not mistake, okay, you made a dating profile, you made your resume, you're not set yet, you're not done yet. You're not going to get engaged tomorrow. Probably not. Now we move into the rebirth phase. So we're entering into the final phase of alchemy that's divided into 3 stages. Stage of alchemy is called fermentation. Here in fermentation, we have examples we can call upon from chemical fermentations. Peter, do you ever make kombucha or beer or sauerkraut or anything like that? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, great. What's that process like? Long. Why?
It takes time. It's an organic process.
And what are you doing during that time? Are you poking it and stirring it every day?
I'm nurturing it. I'm nourishing it so it can grow.
Yeah, but you actually leave it alone a lot, right?
Like that too.
Yeah. So you're actually not really poking it all that much. In sauerkraut, you're supposed to not touch it a lot, because if you do, you disrupt that organic process. There's this organic process, and it's the spiritization. At some point, you go from a jar of rotting cabbage to yummy, rich, alive, probiotic life. Same if you make kombucha or beer. You've got this vat of liquid that is unappealing, and then there's this magical organic process. The alchemist would look in the jar of cabbage, see the bubbles forming, the carbon dioxide producing, and they'd be like, oh, that's the new life. That's the spirit coming in to animate this thing. The fermentation stage is about the receiving of that spirit to reanimate or to bring to life. We see this in our lives. We experience this in our lives. To go back to our book example, you wrote the first draft of your book. What is the absolute worst thing to do right after you write the first draft of your book? The worst thing to do is to edit it right away. The best thing to do is to let it sit there for a minute. Anybody who's written anything knows you don't edit right away. You let it rest. You let it sit, because there's this organic process that happens in your brain as you separate it from this thing. You let it evolve in your consciousness, and then you come back to it later, and it's like it's taken on this new life. You can give it this new infusion of energy. If you start dating somebody, everybody knows that feeling where you go from just dating to there's this animation, this spiritization of, okay, you're shifting into a relationship because the love is blooming, right? It's taking on this new life force. And same with you start a new job, and at first you're just like the new person at this job, you're fumbling your way around. And there's this infusion of life where you're like, okay, cool, I'm doing the thing. I feel confident, right? That is that infusion of the aliveness. That's the reanimation process of alchemy. Okay. You don't want to poke it too much. Most people get stuck in the doing rather than just the being. Here is the process of being and allowing that life force to bloom. Then we move into stage 6, distillation. We have another chemical metaphor here. The chemical process of distillation involves the repeated evaporation and condensation of a substance. We can think about alcohol here, for example, where you're evaporating and condensing to create this very pure, very concentrated essence of a substance. The same is true of our own personal process. There's repeated cycling of our energy within this animated state to come to this very pure, very concentrated essence of our own being, our own consciousness. This is where that relationship, where the love bloomed. Now you're going through trials together as a couple and your love is growing stronger. You're getting more connected and coming into the core essence of who you are in partnership. And same with your job. You're going through this process of, okay, now I'm cycling my energy. I'm taking on new clients. I'm really stretching my wings at this new job. Now I'm really anchored in my identity of here's the role that I'm here to do. You move to a new city, you're out exploring your neighborhood, you're making friends, you've got all your favorite places that you're a local at now. These are the lived experience of the distillation stage. Then the final stage of alchemy is called coagulation. This is the actualization, the completion, where you are living as the most radiant, fully expressed version of yourself. You're celebrating your full, thriving vitality and preparing to enter the next cycle of alchemy. You're preparing to once again enter the death phase when the time is right. We don't need to rush it, but we hold that in mind that we're not done, just as we are continually moving through this process of death, purification, and rebirth throughout our entire lives. So too will we re-enter into the stage of calcination. And the next time we do it, we probably won't be as nervous or intimidated, because once you've been through the death phase, it gets a little easier next time, because you're like, you know what? I remember that after death comes rebirth. This too shall pass. After this period of loss and discomfort, I'm able to find love again. I'm able to find meaning again. I'm able to come into my health and happiness again as a different version of myself. But there's a lot of self-trust, self-love, self-compassion, and resilience that is the result of going through this cycle over and over.
I see calcination of not getting rid of the ego, but breaking down the ego and facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Was there ever a time where you had to confront an aspect of yourself that was difficult to accept? And if there was, how did this experience change you?
I want to share something about my experience here. You're talking about the breaking down of ego. As I talked about these periods of destruction, it's important to remember that which is true is not destroyed. You're talking about breaking down the ego, which is any false sense of self, any aspect that's based in societal conditioning or based in constructs or ideas about who we should be, or trying to fit into little boxes, or whatever version of inauthentic self that might be. As we go through this process of alchemy, anything that is true, fundamental, and core to your essence and in alignment with divine truth and universal law will survive the crucible. It can be deeply confronting and uncomfortable. You asked about my own experience, and yes, I have been through processes of confronting uncomfortable things about myself, supported by this process of alchemy. I have been through one of those relational crucibles, like I talked about as an example here. And I actually wrote an article not all that long ago about my worst breakup was an alchemical initiation. I really have lived through the fires. I can speak to you in firsthand experience about when we're living and we're perpetuating versions of ourselves and our identity that are not true. They're not aligned. We're in a job we don't like, or we're with a wrong person. Here's something I like to tell my students. Choose change before change chooses you. Everybody has been in that position of, I'm living something that I know isn't right. Then it gets a little louder. Hey, come on, this isn't right. You do something else. And then smack, we get slapped in the face with that universal truth, and our worlds are upended. And I have been in that experience. That worst breakup was an alchemical initiation. It went so badly. It didn't have to go that badly, but I was holding on to this version of myself. I was afraid of actually stepping into that letting go, and it was very uncomfortable, but it was a very good lesson that I will remember for the rest of my life.
As you were going through these 7 levels, I was writing down some questions, and if you will allow me, is that at this first stage of calcination, how do you distinguish between healthy self-assessment and destructive ego dissolution during the stage? Are there any practices or insights that can help one let go of ego attachments to allow that growth to come through?
Let me make sure I understand your question. So you're asking, how do we discern between healthy self-assessment and ego?
And destructive ego dissolution during the stage.
I would say ego dissolution is not necessarily an unhealthy thing. So here's the thing about this process. We don't really get to pick and choose where transformation is acting in our lives. We can do our best to collaborate with these cycles. And I will say, here's where the roadmap is very useful. And also, we don't have control over exactly how this goes for us. So there is this element of surrender.
Is that dissolution is letting go of control?
Let me speak to the question I think you're asking, because I feel like maybe we're not quite clued in on the same words. The question I think you're asking is essentially, how do we participate in this process? How I like to position myself and how I train my students is we're in control in the sense that everything's going exactly according to how our human brains think it should, because our human brains really are not all that wise in comparison with these ancient wisdoms based in universal law and natural cycles of power. So what we do is collaborate with divine will and desire according to universal law, which is the law of love. Here I am as this microcosm version of all of consciousness seeking to know itself through the microcosm of that is me. I am the divine seeking to know itself through this experience of my earth walk here. I am in collaboration with spirit. I'm in collaboration with the spiritual forces that govern the process of alchemy. That's like equivalent to saying, let me and alchemy are in the car together and one of us is steering and one navigating. Ideally, we're on the same page and both compromising on where we're going. It really is this radical surrender. Sometimes we don't know what that loss is going to look like, but this is the promise of alchemy, knowing that anything that is rooted in the truth of who we are is going to make it through to the other side. The promise of alchemy is also anything that is not true will not make it through the fire. Anything that is not true to divine law, not true to who we are, not true to our highest selves or our highest and greatest good is not going to make it through that crucible. We don't necessarily know until we're on the other side what that actually is. We don't have to fully understand how that works in order to participate in it happening.
These questions have come to mind. I've been writing down since you're going through these 7 stages. And if you don't mind me asking you the questions on each of these stages that have sprung to mind.
Totally. No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding your question.
I felt dissolution in terms of letting go of control and that breaking down in the calcination stage. You did speak to that. In dissolution, society, in a lot of ways, will either encourage us or discourage us from letting go of control. I think it's more the latter. My question is, in stage 2, which I appreciate is linked to stage 1, how do you maintain trust in the transformative process when things seem to dissolve around you?
How do you maintain trust? This is one of these philosophical questions of you just have to do it. That's asking, how do I have faith? The definition of faith is this belief beyond all reason. It's not really a logic thing. Like trust, we're developing trust in ourselves or a person. We can develop trust. I would say intelligent trust exists according to our personal experience and the evidence. One way we can develop trust is by saying, I understand logically that the cycle of alchemy is rooted in universal law and nature. I have the evidence of thousands of years of human history recording the cycle of the seasons. I have all of the evidence of my own life saying, I see outside my window every day the laws of expansion and contraction with the rising and setting of the sun. They can observe this living through the cycle of the seasons. I know this is how change works. And you know what, my friends who are listening? Yes, you are a unique and special buttercup, but you are not so special that the laws of the universe do not apply to you. They do. They apply to you. So if the laws of the universe go through these natural cycles of first there is death, then there's this process of rest and purification, and then spring comes again, why would you be exempt from those laws? So this is part of that process of trust. Even if this is my first time making a really big change in my life, I've always done what I'm supposed to do, and I've never really chosen anything for myself. I feel really nervous about that. Even if that's the case for you, you can look at the evidence in the world around you. This is the promise of alchemy. It might take a while. We get to relax into the process, but also knowing that in my year-long course, we go through the cycle of alchemy throughout the entire year. We spend about 7 weeks studying each stage. We're studying other stuff in the meantime, but we spend about 7 weeks in each stage of alchemy so that my students can learn practices and energies associated with each stage, really experience the energies of each stage. But that isn't, again, an arbitrary timeline. That's not actually how it's going to go in your life. People can be in very extended periods of dissolution if they're going through a big, long grief process. People can be in extended periods of fermentation if they're going through this long rebirth process. But the reason I give my students that time is so they get to know the feeling, the energy, and the practices of each stage, so that when they're ready in their life, they know how to work with that. And they know exactly, okay, this is what this feels like. This is how to move through it. Just keep that in mind if you yourself are feeling this nervousness about, okay, how do I trust this? How do I lean into this? How do I let this work its magic in my life? Again, look to the evidence of the world around you. Look to the evidence of your own life experiences. I'm 100% sure that all of you tuning into this have been through something hard. You've been through something hard. You've been through some aspect of loss. You've been through some letting go, and here you are today. You have survived. You have come into some new version of yourself. So also look to your own life experience. You may not have known about alchemy at the time, but you do now, which means that the next time you go through that cycle, it's going to be different because you have this awareness in the back of your mind. Maybe you'll have more tools in your toolkit. Maybe you'll come do this apprenticeship with me, and then you'll feel like you've got a lot of tools in your toolkit of how to navigate this cycle. But again, trust is part faith, looking at the evidence of nature and our lives.
I trust what is irrefutable, like the seasons, like gravity, like the rising of the sun. That's where I put my trust because it's irrefutable by humans. In terms of the third stage of separation, I wrote down identifying truth. It's inviting me to discern and reclaim what is essential. How does one approach identifying the beliefs or values that truly define oneself? Are there any methods that could be helpful in separating what serves you from what does not?
Yeah, with each stage, and part of how I teach this to my students is every single module, I give movement practices and embodiment practices so that you're, okay, how does this feel in the body? And for separation, one of the techniques that I teach is people how to use your body as a pendulum, how to tune to, okay, this is the frequency of health and aliveness and truth in my body, and this is the feeling of misalignment. No, that's not good. Then we can use this practice to explore and feel into. If your mind isn't quite sure, your body knows the truth, and you're going to be able to drop into your somatic awareness and drop into, okay, I'm asking my body to please help me discern between these two paths to feel which one feels like radiant health and aliveness, which one feels like misalignment or untruth. Values elicitation is a very useful practice to really get clear on what's important to you and how are you defining these values in life and how are you living those values into being.
Have you ever had to separate yourself from a situation to realign with your values? And if you did, how did that affect your journey?
Yes, I would say myself, and I'm sure a lot of people tuning into this can relate, as a very sensitive, empathic young kiddo, it was very easy for me to shape shift myself to be in alignment of whoever I was hanging out with, whether that was my friends at the time or a partnership. I have a lifelong history of shape shifting in order to align harmoniously with the collective vibration of whoever I'm with. I think probably like my early to mid 20s, I went through a really big teaching and initiation around that because I ended up in a toxic situation with some people I was spending time with, and it felt horrible to me. That was my wake up call, a very dramatic wake up call to how that is actually a very detrimental thing. And here's this initiation that I have into very firmly in my own seat of power of my selfhood, my own confidence, self-knowledge, and really grounding and stabilizing into myself. Then being very clear on who I am, what my values are, what's important to me, how I behave, and how that translates into my expression and embodiment in the world. I was really glad for those teachings too. That was a very powerful lesson in my own selfhood.
In terms of conjunction, I wrote down integrating opposites / adjacencies, because I tend not to see things in opposite, but more as adjacencies, because one thing affects another. But we tend to look at things in opposite. So in conjunction, we unite opposing parts of ourselves. Was there a time where you had to reconcile conflicting beliefs or identities? And if so, what insights emerged from that integration?
Yes, I want to go back to what you said about conjunction is about integrating opposing parts of yourself. And I'm going to caveat that. So the stage of conjunction is not necessarily about integrating opposing parts. It's about recombining what
Right.
remains after the death and purification aspects, which may or may not actually be opposing. The conjunction might be a very harmonious reformation. Although in some cases, there's actually a healing principle called parts integration that names what you were talking about, where I commonly see this in clients where two parts of the inner constellation of self are seemingly at odds. I know I've been through this process. This is a very textbook inner constellation healing work piece. But for an example that somebody might experience is saying, gosh, I know I would be better off if I did this in my life. If I don't know, went to do yoga 4 times a week and ate differently, for example. And then some other part of themselves is, but actually what I really want to do is stay home and curl up under a blanket. Okay, so you have these two parts of themselves that are seemingly at odds, but then you can come down to the core of what is motivating the core of each of these parts of self. What's motivating the core is actually the same value of self healing and preservation, but they're going about it through these two different means. So conjunction, or in this particular healing principle called parts integration, getting these parts to actually come together because they're unified in their goal, even if the end result is very different. This is a very normal thing that people experience. The language that people use and when they're talking about this is, part of me wants to quit my job and go travel the world, but part of me wants to stay here and become an expert in my field, right? So we have these seemingly very juxtaposed parts of self, both of which are valid, both of which have a lot of energy behind them. Rather than feeling torn, how do we bring those parts down to the shared values that they actually have in common? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was thinking about how do we then go about approaches one can take to help embrace those dualities or seemingly contradictions in
Yeah.
one's personal growth.
Yes, there are tools and practices for every single one of these stages. As I've mentioned, have the guide from my website that you can download, references some of these practices. And again, I spend a whole year teaching this. So we're getting the toe in the water version, but yes, there are practices for working with each of these energies.
In terms of fermentation, stage 5, I wrote down embracing new inspiration because it involves letting that inspiration and creativity rise from one's previous struggles. What role does creativity and new perspectives play in one's personal transformation?
Here, it's partly the creativity arising from previous struggles, but it's also, remember, this is the spiritization. The fermentation stage is really well characterized by the concept of Frankenstein's monster. You have a bunch of body parts sewn together, laying on a table, and then you shock it. It's that infusion of life into something that was previously a rudimentary form, but not actually animate. A really good example of this process is in Christian mysticism, the story of Yeshua, who is crucified, goes into the tomb for 3 days, and then receives the Holy Spirit and is reanimated into immortality. The story of Jesus is a very alchemical story. It's very much about this divine re-entering, reanimating aspect. It's also in the process of conception, for example, of how does this clump of cells come to hold a consciousness. It is the spiritization, receiving of this spiritual force. It's very subtle, very mystical. It is a spiritual practice. And this is one of the very magical parts of the alchemical cycle of creating a receptive container to receive the animating force of new life.
In terms of fermentation, and I wrote down turning past challenges into future strengths. Is that a good way to characterize it?
Turning past challenges into future strengths. I would say that's not really specific to fermentation. That is part of the alchemical cycle as a whole. Fermentation, very specifically, the receiving of spirit, about that coming back to life and turning past challenges into strengths. That really is looking at the cycle of alchemy as a whole. If you're in a challenging situation, let's look at a common loss experience of, for example, you lose a parent. This is a rite of passage that the majority of people on earth go through in their lives at some point or another of losing a parent. We'll just walk through all the stages here. No matter what your relationship with this parent was, maybe it was very loving and very supportive, maybe it was very challenged, maybe it was some combination of both, or all of the spectrum of closeness and distance and love and challenge, etc. So we go through this process of losing a parent. And on the calcination stage, this is the loss of the physical structure of your parent dies. You might have a service, go to the funeral, etc. There's the loss of that person in their physical body. So that's the calcination part. The dissolution part is the process of whatever grieving, mourning, processing, forgiveness. No matter what your relationship with that parent was, there is some aspect of emotional and energetic processing involved. Whether it's, I'm so sad because they were amazing and we were so close and I love you, or whether it was, I'm glad you're gone, and some version of whatever, there is this. And also our own inner constellation of, okay, this parent is gone. What does that mean about me? What does that mean about my identity? Who am I now? Now there's this change in my inner architecture going on, right? I'm losing some part of myself that had that person in my life. It's not just about losing that person, it's also losing some part of myself. Same with the loss of the physical structure. Depending on the nature of the relationship, maybe you were in a caregiving role. Maybe there's the loss of, I don't go over to visit my mom once or twice a week. I don't have that routine in my life anymore. Now there's a change in my own identity where I don't have this parent in my life. So that, again, there's this calcination dissolution experience of the loss, both in the physical sense and in the energetic emotional sense. Then we go into separation, which is that evaluation. Okay, so now I'm able to analyze and evaluate and see a little more clearly. This is where we have some perspective. I'm able to zoom out, say, you know what? For all the challenges that we had, I know they did their best and I know they loved me even though these were all the challenges. Or, wow, I'm able to see beyond the rose-colored lenses and see their faults and I'm able to forgive them, right? So there's this coming to terms with evaluating and sorting out that experience. That's the separation stage. Then we move into conjunction where, okay, now I've gone through this grieving period. Now I'm establishing new routines. Now I'm establishing this new version of who I am without this person in my life or without this force in my life. For example, whether one parent is gone or all your parents are gone. So there's this new version of who I am as this self in the world. And then fermentation, at some point, that new version of that identity, you stop crying every day. You're starting to have this new version of life goes on. We all go through this process. If you've lost somebody, there's this moment where you realize you're not living for that grief or that past version of yourself anymore. You're now looking ahead to the future. There's this infusion of new energy, this new inspiration. Then the distillation is the crystallization of that new version of yourself. And then coagulation, the full actualization of that selfhood.
Beautiful example. I was going through that this afternoon, actually. Interesting. You've picked that one, loss of a parent. I can characterize it through those 7 stages, which is fantastic. In terms of distillation, I wrote down Purifying Wisdom. I see it as a refinement journey, refining my insights, distilling wisdom from my experiences. But how does one identify what is essential wisdom as distinct from what is transient learning in this phase?
I think true wisdom is going to be true no matter what, and then the way that you apply it might be different. Remember also that we go through the alchemical cycle again. For example, this wisdom that you gained, refining the wisdom is a good way to look at this. Of one of these pieces is this is going to be true as this version of yourself, but next time you go through the alchemical crucible, that might not survive the next round, because if that version of you changes, then it's no longer applicable.
Lastly, in terms of coagulation, I can see that in terms of the blood, your blood system goes through solve and coagula. I wrote down manifesting transformation. Coagulation is the embodiment of transformation, where you not only embody but you embrace it so you can enact and extend it, because you integrate everything you've learned. That's the invitation. Are there metrics for transformation when one is in this final stage of embodiment? Are there any practices or reminders that can help a person to stay aligned with their new self? And that depends what self we're talking about, but that's another subject after transformation.
I wrote an article about this kind of a while ago of like, how do we quantify transformation in ourselves and in our clients? What does that mean? Particularly in the personal development, neo-spiritual healing community, we see this word thrown around a lot, transformation. How do we define transformation? How do we know when it's happened? That article went out to my newsletter a while ago. These are really great questions because, again, transformation, just like alchemy, is this buzzword. I personally define transformation as some kind of lasting change in frequency vibration that manifests on all levels and layers, meaning physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, of our identity until the next cycle. That's part of coagulation. Like you're saying, it's the manifestation of this transformation. I look at it as this like temporary resting place is really how I think of coagulation. Because remember the cycle of alchemy, because you don't ever stop. Life doesn't exist in stagnation. The seasons are always rolling through, just like the cells in our body are continually taking themselves apart, composting the ingredients and building new cells. We're in this dynamic process of death and rebirth every single day, every single moment on a molecular level and on the macro level. And so coagulation, I really do see as very necessary. We want to enjoy coagulation. We want to enjoy the fruits of our labor and celebrate and appreciate and radiate the self that we have become. And yes, there are practices that we can work on. So in cultivation or in coagulation, we do a lot of cultivation practices to bring in more energy and then to radiate out that energy. We look at the mythos around alchemy. The end product of alchemy is called the Philosopher's Stone, which is said to be able to transmute any metal into gold and to create the elixir of life. So we look at, okay, what is the selfhood version of that? The selfhood version of that is to transmute any metal into gold. You take this tiny sliver of the Philosopher's Stone and then you apply it to any other metal to bring it to its most actualized form. That is the self as the most actualized version of ourselves going out into the world and radiating our own actualization to inspire this in others. This is where we become the force of that transmutation in the world. We emanate our own enlightenment to support this transformation in the world. As alchemists, we come to our own, we don't transform in a vacuum. We live in a world where we are all connected. And as we live in a world experiencing ecological destruction, war, genocide, oppression, and misuse of power, as long as we live in a world where that is true, it is impossible for any single one of us to transcend that reality because we don't live in a vacuum. We are all connected. And so as we are going through this process of transformation, another thing I remind my students is we're going through this on all levels of the I am alchemy. I'm going through this personally. Most of what we've talked about in this podcast episode is the personal experience of that, but also the we are. This is where we share, we radiate. This is where, again, is this version of yourself who the fully actualized, most radiant version of yourself. You're going grocery shopping, you're having conversations with people. You might brighten somebody's day just by being this version of you in their presence. And then the all is alchemy. How are we working on the collective and planetary levels of consciousness? How are we working on the global imperative of our ecological crisis right now? By sharing our awareness of what it takes to transform and applying these principles practically, not only in our own lives, but for the benefit of all beings everywhere and for the earth herself. This is part of that actualization process, is we understand that it goes beyond us and we take empowered, inspired actions to ensure that the benefits of our transformation extend beyond us, which is not only a great thing to do for everybody, it is also a selfish thing to do because our own full liberation is tied with the liberation of all beings. It is inseparable.
I want to ask about ethics and your course. I can see alchemical ideas are re-entering popular discourse, and there's the possibility of a fine line between enlightening and misleading. How do you, as an expert in alchemy, navigate the responsibility of sharing this knowledge and teaching this knowledge with people who may not fully understand the complexities? How do we prevent these alchemical concepts from being misinterpreted or commercialized in such a way that could mislead or exploit? Are there any ethical guidelines that you believe should govern the modern study of teaching of alchemy? Are there any common misconceptions about alchemy that you find yourself frequently correcting?
I'll start with that last one. Yes, there are misunderstandings of alchemy used constantly in the modern context that I get a little annoyed at. And I think people don't actually know what alchemy is. It's thrown around as a buzzword in the personal development community and neo-spiritual community. And people think it's a metaphor for transformation. It's not. It's a very specific thing, and it is not to be substituted for the word transformation. But then people also feel like it has this mysterious and vaguely expensive connotation too. And so there's chocolate alchemy or alchemy of dance, and it's about the bringing together of opposites or the like mixing of ingredients, which is not totally incorrect, but it is a woefully inadequate use of the word. People have lost touch with it actually means this very deep, very powerful, and very specific thing. I think, honestly, the biggest danger in terms of ethical considerations, certainly there was a lot of evidence in history of people claiming to be able to make gold and fooling people and giving them the elixir of life that was some dirt potion or whatever. There's a lot of that. And I think we're at a little bit less of a risk of that right now. People are less likely to buy a dirt potion. And maybe, I don't know. But in terms of ethical considerations, I really think, again, there's this I Am Alchemy exists beyond, or not, I Am Alchemy is the name of my course. I Am Alchemy is beyond humanity. And it really does. Just like I say, my course exists beyond me. And my course isn't my course. It is an ancient and powerful mystery school lineage that exists beyond any one person. And alchemy is this ancient and powerful mystery school that exists beyond humanity. This exists according to the laws of nature, the universe, and spirit. In some way, the ethical considerations, they matter, but they also don't, because again, it's like saying, how can we be ethical about gravity? The universe's responsibility to enforce the laws of gravity. And how can we be ethical about the seasons? Again, it is natural law. But the way that somebody might try to market gravity or sell an amulet to make you immune to gravity, okay, that's not ethical, but that's the interpretation of how people are communicating about this ancient and powerful thing. And I think that's really where there's this realm of responsibility and integrity where people misusing or misrepresenting alchemy for their own personal gain. That just comes down to the only way you're going to know if people are using it correctly or misusing it is if you know what alchemy actually is. Our own awareness and discernment is the best defense that we have to being able to spot an unethical or misuse of those terms. I don't think that transmuting into the highest version of ourselves is ever going to be a bad thing. I don't think that there's really any danger of anyone being unethical in terms of, gosh, I'm going to practice alchemy so I can be really healthy. Again, but I think very important to look at the process of purification and transmutation that we're going through is not only for us alone. So how are we living that into being through our inspired actions? How are we living that into being in the world around us through emanating the principles of transformation, really rooting into not only the spiritual technology, but the actual values of this work and rooting into the generosity of transformation and healing, where if I am fortunate enough and skilled enough to devote myself to this practice of transformation, may the benefits of this ripple beyond me. May the efforts of my own devotion extend to others. May I be a force of change in the world.
You're clearly an agency of amplification, and looking at your 200-hour certified alchemy course,
Yeah, it's actually more than 200 hours, but
Oh, is
yes.
it? From what I can glean, it's a structured pathway guiding
Mhm.
students through ancient wisdom and practical techniques.
Yeah.
And I'd like to dive into some of the details with you because I'd love to hear how
Mhm.
you designed the course to act as a modern crucible for growth. Can you share how the course structure helps students engage with alchemical principles into a way that's both accessible and deeply transformative?
Yes, the course is a year long. It's a deep dive apprenticeship, and it is very much a mix of these ancient spiritual technologies and healing systems in application of the modern practical context. That's very much my sweet spot as a modern mystic, as a practical mystic. The course is part online and part in person. I have students and clients all over the world. I have people fly in for retreats and people who participate in the online portion. But really, the apprenticeship is geared towards people who can come do the full experience and have the hands on experiential education. I think it's 39 different modules throughout the year. There's a few each month that are the pre recorded videos where I'm going into in-depth teachings and exercises and practices based in alchemical principles and alchemical spiritual technology, both the philosophy and the practice of these alchemical principles. And I'm currently halfway through my 5th cohort. I've taught this going on 5 times now. I've developed this over years of study and practice. Each module is also including exercises. So ways that you can take these teachings and then immediately apply them in your life. So it's very much, here's a principle, now go do it. Here's a teaching, now go live it. And here's how to immediately apply it in your life. I'm very much about the practical application of this. It's not just to sit there and think about it. With most of them, they're including movement practices, drawing upon different somatic awareness, experiencing techniques, as well as different Qigong to work within the organ systems, moving energy according to the different energies of the stages of alchemy, working with different aspects of the inner constellation of self, archetypal influences that we're working with inner pathways of initiation to mastery through the archetypes. I offer one-on-one sessions to my apprentices. You're getting support from me personally throughout the year and applying practical tools to your personal process of transformation as you are in this crucible of study. Of course, there are the retreats coming for in-person training 4 times throughout the year. And I host those currently at my home. I live in the forest of the Pacific Northwest, coming out to nature and having a very beautiful in-person journey with your cohort. It's a powerful hands-on practice where we're doing chemical ritual practices, movement practices, and ceremonial initiations.
Many people are drawn to the mystery and transformation that alchemy promises, but many often struggle with where to start. You've created a 200-hour plus certified course that offers a structured, in-depth approach to understanding and practicing alchemy. Can you tell us a little bit, a brief outline about the course's structure and the key outcomes that students can expect to achieve by the end of it? And I appreciate everybody's different.
It depends because everybody is going through their own unique transformational journey in the course. But I have seen humbling, beautiful, and powerful transformations in people as a result of this work. This course is not for brand new beginners. This course is for people who have already been through a spiritual awakening, who have at least a little bit of study and training and practice in some type of spiritual work. If you are new to the path, take a beat, prepare for it, reach out to me if you're interested, and I'll let you know, like, here's the best way to prepare to make sure that you're ready for this, because it's not ideal for somebody who is brand new as a beginner. But if you are, I will say, like moderate, intermediate to advanced practice, this is going to be really valuable to you in your practice. So I have people come in who are practitioners and they're care providers, they're coaches, therapists, body workers, naturopaths, social workers, counselors, some aspect of care providing, whether it's in the mystic traditions or in social services. And they're wanting these tools and technologies to apply to their practice. They're taking it for certification in the ability to then apply these tools, not only for themselves, but for their clients and patients. The other half of my students are people who are not practitioners in that way, but they might be working in academia or the legal field, or they're on the boards of nonprofits or some other aspect of their professional life, but they're really called to the mysteries for their own personal transformation and then sharing this in their lives in that organic way. When people come into this, I pretty much universally hear from all my apprentices almost this, I can't explain it. I was just called, or my guides told me to look for alchemy and then I found you. So there is this very mystical beckoning, which I love and laugh at. I have somebody who's coming into the next year's cohort already. I've got 2 people already signed up for next year, which is great. One of whom said, the dragons told me to find you and ask you, and the dragons bossed me around until I finally reached out to you. Okay, great. The dragons are bringing people in. I've seen people throughout this course address some very profound developmental trauma and wounding, come to newfound peace. I've seen people get divorced. I've seen people get married. I've seen people have a child. I've seen people move across the country. I've seen people quit their jobs. I've seen people start businesses. I've seen people move from being like, I know that things aren't right and I'm not exactly sure what to do. I've studied and practiced a whole bunch of different energy healing modalities. This is, again, another thing I universally see. I've studied a lot of things and none of them seem to work. I know that something isn't right and I'm trying to heal and change, but whatever I'm doing isn't working. Then they come to study alchemy, and alchemy makes everything else make sense. This is one of the other pieces that is really important about alchemy is you can have as many modalities and tools in your tool belt as you want, but unless you understand how to organize them effectively according to the laws of transformation, it's going to be a lot harder to use them. It's like trying to build a house without a blueprint. You can have a hammer and a saw and a wrench and a screwdriver in your tool belt, but if you have no architecture of what you're assembling, your house is not going to stand up. But if you have the map of how transformation works, you have the stages of alchemy, and you understand the architecture of what you're building, you're going to be able to use your tools effectively and apply them in the right place at the right time in order to make the changes in your life.
It doesn't surprise me people are called to your program because you're a powerful beacon of transmission for this process. And I can feel that from you. With a subject that is as complex and transformative as alchemy, personalized guidance, community support are crucial. Can you briefly explain how you support your students throughout the 200 plus hours, especially if they encounter difficulties or emotional challenges during the process?
Yes. And I would say people inevitably do encounter challenges and difficulties, which is why I have the personalized support as part of the course. The way we go through the course is there's some online kind of self-study, watch on your own time pieces, but we also have group classes twice a month. So you get to check in with me and with your cohort, and once a month, one-on-one sessions with me. So there's a lot of touch points. There's a lot of opportunity for people to ask for help. In every live class, we start with a check-in, like, where are you at? How are you doing? We share the rose, the thorn, and the bud. What is blooming in your life? What is pokey and challenging in your life? What are you growing into? And any requests for support. We keep very consistent tabs on how everybody's doing, and it's a strong community of support and care within the container as well. And all of my apprentices, I do assign a peer mentor from a previous cohort. So people have the connection not only of people in their cohort, but also somebody who's been through the course already. I have a couple of my students who are doing this course for the second time, which I find just so lovely that they were called of, yes, I want to do this again because it was so meaningful and so powerful. They're getting this whole new realm of initiation by going through it again. I'm very humbled and appreciative that they love it so much. They're back for more. But yes, there's a lot of support, whether it's from me in the one-on-one, whether it's from the group container or the peer mentor experience. People inevitably fall apart a little bit in this course. That's part of the whole deal. We all die at some point. There's a little bit of people flop around and fall apart, and that's part of the deal. It's baked into the experience, and I'm there to help you. I'm there to help you find your footing once you're ready to get back up.
What kind of professional roles or personal settings are best suited for applying the skills that one would learn in your program? Are there any specific industries or fields that you see as a natural alignment with alchemical knowledge?
It's very universally applicable. So I can tell you what kind of people are drawn to this work tend to be those who are in some kind of care providing service role. But this does translate really beyond that. I've had students, both currently and previously, who are coaches, therapists, massage therapists, body workers, energy healers in social services, in medicine, Western medicine. Those are like the healers. But I've also had people who work in academia, people who are teaching in university. So people who are sculpting young minds in social justice and criminology. So working in like how do we create justice and work in social justice fields. I also have students who work in the legal fields, applying alchemy to the law and applying alchemy to that aspect of justice. I also have clients in permaculture, sustainability, in urban design, and soil quality. So also connected with the environment, accounting. It's really all over the place. People are doing this for themselves, but then they're also doing it for their lives. No matter what your professional career might be. Oh, interior design also. And then that was really interesting. So I have all my students for certification. Part of the process is delivering a practicum class to your cohort. And so for interior design, we all received a class on alchemy of space and how we're interacting with creating a sacred space for healing and transformation within our homes.
I can see how applicable it is in many fields. Completing a 200 plus hour course is a significant commitment, and students want assurance that their certification holds value. I know you briefly touched on the certification process. Are there any recognized standards that your course meets, and how can students demonstrate their alchemical expertise after completing the program?
My course is not affiliated with any governing board, and that is an intentional choice on my part. I have looked into actually having it allied with the NCBTMB, which is the National Certification Board of Therapeutic Massage and Body Work. There were a couple other boards, like a coaching board I was looking at. I opted not to receive any kind of official status because of the inherently limiting nature of those boards. I would have been tied to having to organize my curriculum according to their standards were. And in many cases, I found that my own organization was more rigorous than what they were asking for. But due to the nature of teaching a mystery school, the timing and organization of my course is aligned with the celestial calendar. Every single year, the way I'm delivering it is a bit different according to what's going on with the planets and the stars. We're working with those forces throughout the course. So rather than be beholden to any governing board or governing body, it feels more important to me to be beholden to nature and the laws of the universe. As a result, I have had clients ask me, hey, Michelle, I have this form for continuing education credits with my governing board. Can you sign it? I'm happy to help people fulfill whatever continuing education credits through their own governing boards. I've had their course credit with me apply to their own licensure on a case-by-case basis. If people are called to alchemy and they're wanting to prepare for that, I encourage people to reach out to me. Oftentimes, people start in one-on-one with me and then shift into I Am Alchemy, because that's a way we can prepare and really get their foundations up to speed so that they're ready for the course. I do have some people who are just ready to go and demonstrate a competent background in their field. To enter the course, you need to submit an application and have an interview with me. Some people who come into the course, I already know they've already been working with me or they've been studying with me. So it's a pretty quick process of, yes, I know where you're coming from. But then for anybody who's coming in who we've never spoken before, we need to talk at least a couple of times and make sure that this is going to be a good fit for you. If people are called to this or interested, please reach out to me through my website, michellehawk.com. Again, you can download the free guide to the stages of alchemy. That's a really good place to start. Get your toe in the water. You can send me an email if you're interested. You can fill out the application on my website or book a call with me from my website, and we can get that process rolling. If it feels like, yes, you really want to pursue this, you want to be ready. The course starts every spring, so we've got a few months to get you up to speed so you can be ready to go in the spring if that is what is aligned.
Michelle, it's been inspiring to explore some of the depth and the breadth of your work today. And for the ancient principles you bring to life, to the meaningful transformations that you guide your students through. As we wrap up, Is there one core alchemical principle or insight you hope all your students take away from your course?
The 7 stages of alchemy that I gave you, like as long as you have that blueprint, you're going to be able to navigate anything life throws at you. And it is truly your roadmap to the process of transformation in our lives, which truly is happening for our entire lives. But the other core piece that I would invite anyone to take away, whether they've graduated from I Am Alchemy or not, is choose change before change chooses you. Because when we collaborate with the cycles of transformation, we get to stand confident and empowered in this process and take our seat of power as co-creators and collaborators with these very powerful elemental, ancient, and spiritual forces in our lives. That is really what is necessary for all of us who are wanting to create transformation, not only in our lives, but in the world. And the world really needs it right now. So please step into your seat of power and ask for help if you need it. I'm here to help. I know, Peter, you have many wonderful resources as well. So please find a guide who can help you find whatever support you need so that you can be that version of you in your life and in the world. For all of those around you, this is what I say in my prayers. May this work serve and be for the benefit of me, all those around me, all beings on earth and the earth herself. And I really feel that's what we're here to do.
That's powerful. Michelle, I've learned so much from you. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, the insights, the holy work that you're doing, and the contribution you're making to the world.
Thank you, Peter. It's been a pleasure to be here. For all tuning in, I hope this was helpful. Please go find me via my website, michellehawk.com. I'm sure that'll be in show notes, and I look forward to hearing from you.